There's a moment in Quarantine Zone, the last check, where everything seems calm. The queue is orderly, the lights are on, no alarms, no gunfire. And yet, your hand hesitates over a single decision. Because you know that one mistake, one overlooked symptom, one moment of mercy could unravel everything you're trying to protect. This isn't a game about fighting the apocalypse. It's a game about deciding who you let survive it. Quarantine Zone, The Last Check is the new game from Devolver Digital that was released this week on the 12th of January, hitting Game Pass on launch day. Quarantine Zone doesn't put you in the boots of a soldier charging headfirst into the apocalypse. Instead, it places you somewhere far more uncomfortable. You're the final filter, the last decision before safety or catastrophe. The concept is simple, almost deceptively so. People arrive at a checkpoint, you inspect them, you decide who gets through, who's turned away, and who never leaves at all. But within that simplicity is where the game finds its tension. It's a responsibility simulator. Every person in line represents a risk, not just to you, but to everything behind the gate. And the game never lets you forget that. Symptoms can be subtle. Information can be incomplete. Time is limited. You're not making decisions with certainty. You're making them with probability. What makes The Last Check compelling is how it reframes the zombie outbreak fantasy. This isn't about surviving despite other people. It's about surviving because of how you judge them. The infected aren't always obvious. The healthy aren't always safe. And the consequences of being wrong don't arrive immediately. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they spread. The game draws clear inspiration from titles like Papers, Please, not just in its surface mechanics, but in its philosophy. Authority here isn't empowering, it's isolating. You're given tools, rules, and procedures, but none of them absolve you of any blame. If something goes wrong, it's because you let it. And that's where the premise really sinks in. You're not just managing a system, you're standing between fear and necessity. If you're too cautious, your quarantine bay will get too full. Get a decision wrong, the base begins to rot from the inside. Become too trigger happy, sending people to isolation, like I definitely didn't. You won't have enough people to hit your quota every 5 days. There is no clean solution, only trade-offs you can hope to live with. The horror doesn't come from what's outside the walls. It comes from the quiet moment where you look at a person, weigh the odds, and make a choice you won't get to take back. Simple loot. Each day begins with arrivals at your checkpoint. Civilians, each one bringing symptoms, stories, and uncertainty. You inspect them using the tools available to you, decide their fate, and move on to the next case. But the day doesn't end there. Beyond the desk lies your base, a fragile ecosystem of power, food, and defences. Every decision you make at the checkpoint echoes inward. Letting someone through could either help towards your quota, or introduce an infection that slowly tears the place apart. Failure isn't always immediate either. A mistake made on one day can play out very badly and swiftly the next morning. If someone turns into a zombie overnight, in a somewhat loaded quarantine bay, you can quickly lose 4 or 5 people because you overlook something. And that's the brilliance of the structure. The game lets you think you've done well, until the consequences of your decisions play out. The inspection mechanics are where most of the game takes place. You're given multiple tools with the amount increasing over time, introducing new things to check for. Visual checks, scanners, retina checks, UV lights, and the trusty hammer, which became a favourite of mine. And you're expected to make accurate calls under pressure. Symptoms can be obvious or nearly invisible. Some people lie. Some don't know that they're infected. Others can get violent. They can also bring bags in with them, and you're asked to check for banned items, guns, ammunition, zombie parts, and eventually things hidden, well, where the sun doesn't shine. What elevates the system is how often it forces you to act without certainty. You're rarely sure, you're rarely confident. You can find yourself guessing, but guessing with consequences. And as the game progresses, these guesses get harder. New variables are introduced, new infection types, new rules that complicate what once felt manageable. It's not about learning a pattern, it's about adapting to uncertainty. You can help research new symptoms to aid with checks by sending people with strange symptoms to the laboratory, where you very delicately and non-intrusively rip out an organ, pulverize it into a liquid, and run checks on it. The game's atmosphere does a lot of the heavy lifting. The soundtrack is subtle, it doesn't push you towards panic. Instead, there's silence, machinery humming, distant zombie noises, and gunshots that may or may not mean something. The UI is functional, almost clinical, but that only helps to heighten the stress. You're surrounded by information, yet never quite enough of it seems. Tension builds not through spectacle, but through anticipation. The fear isn't that something will happen, like why the fourth person in the queue is wearing a sack over their head and has literal skeleton hands. It's that something already has, and you just didn't notice it. There's enough variety here, introduced with new symptoms and tools to use. Keep the game fresh enough throughout. Events shift, infection patterns change. That said, repetition does eventually creep in. Once you understand the system, some encounters lose their initial bite. Pun intended. It did feel like, as you went on, some of the initial symptoms, like bite marks themselves, became very infrequent, even though you still checked for them out of habit. With more repetition of symptoms associated with some of the newer tools that you gained access to. Still, the variability is enough to keep you second guessing yourself, and that's where the game remains really effective. Away from performing your duties at the checkpoint, the game transforms into something closer to a survival management sim. Resources are always tight, power outages cripple systems, defences must be planned carefully. Managing the levels of first aid kits and canteen supplies, for example, is really easy. But there are lots of building upgrades to pick and choose from and prioritise. There's one, for example, that gives you 8 stacks of supplies in the canteen each day. Very useful, as it reduces the burden to remember to keep it stocked. There are also useful upgrades to the defences that allow soldiers to help you fend off waves of enemies every few nights, whilst you control a very solidly armed drone. The AI behaviour offers enough variety without being revolutionary. Civilians behave believably enough to keep you uneasy. Some plead, some rush, some hide things poorly, and others hide them well. Difficulty ramps steadily, sometimes sharply, and early mistakes are forgiving. Late game ones are not. The line between challenge and frustration is thin, but usually intentional. Pathfinding issues, UI hiccups, and occasional logic errors can undermine otherwise tense moments. Most bugs break immersion rather than runs themselves, but some are genuinely disruptive. How much this bothers you depends on your tolerance for jank. The systems are strong enough to survive their rough edges, but they are noticeable. Of note, during my own playthrough, I had an issue multiple times, where when it started raining in the game, the rain effect on my screen persisted until I Alt F4'd the game and relaunched it, causing the game to look incredibly pixelated, as you can see. I also had multiple crashes to desktop, enough to mean that I stopped playing around 4/5 of the way through. Hopefully you have less issues. The one thing that the game gets absolutely right is in its annoyance at yourself. It is genuinely annoying when you find out you've let someone in, made the wrong decision, and are presented with a screen that shows you that 4 people died because you missed this symptom. Felt a lot of the time like I was kicking myself when this happened, and it was genuinely, weirdly, strangely enjoyable. You remember the people you let through, the ones that you didn't, the moments you hesitated and the moments you didn't hesitate enough. There is far more emphasis on the incorrect decisions and their consequences than there is on the correct ones when a busload of healthy survivors are shipped off. So, in conclusion, if you're looking for action, spectacle, or clear-cut victories, this probably won't satisfy you. But if you're drawn to slow burn tension, moral uncertainty, and the weight of responsibility, bugs and issues aside, this game is for you. It's one that I will be coming back to when there's a patch. It doesn't ask you to save the world, only to decide who's healthy enough to remain in it. And it's a fantastic experience.